Okay, good evening. Right, so the Parsha is going to be a little bit shorter because it was a slightly longer halacha share, but Parsha's Kedoshim is really full of fascinating areas and topics. It has a whopping total of 51 mitzvahs in Parsha's Kedoshim. Really huge. 13 mitzvahs aseh and 38 mitzvahs lo aseh. And we are going to focus on a couple of very interesting points. Let's see how much we can do. The pasuk begins, if you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com. I'll send you the handout. The pasuk says, when you reap and harvest your field, don't finish off and harvest even the corner of the field, but rather you should leave the peah. Leave the corner, the peah, for poor people. And anything which is dropped, don't gather it in, leave it on the ground, and the aniyim, the poor people, come and take it. So too, v'karmacha, when you're harvesting the vine, lo sa'olel or peret karmacha lo salaket lo ani v'lager tazo v'som Hashem. Again, we'll see in more detail exactly what that means. So that is the halacha of leaving over leket, shikha, peah, based in this week's parsha. Now, there is an amazing oznaim laTorah. The oznaim laTorah we've quoted before, Zalman Sorotskin, the great-grandfather of Zalman Sorotskin, who lives here in London, and who's of course named after him. He has a classic sefer on Chumash called the Oznaim LaTorah, and he asks a very interesting question when it comes to matonos la'aniyim. He says the following: HaTorah chayva oisanu b'matonos kuhuna, matonos aniyim. There are two types of matonos. The matonos that we give to the kohanim, the various animal parts, there are 24 in total. Uv matonos aniyim, and there is also matonos that we give to poor people, like we just described in the pasuk. Aval lekohanim mitzuvim anachnu livcharis hatoiv v'hamuvcha shebeperes haaretz. When it comes to matnas kuhuna, the gifts we give to the kohanim, we have to give the choicest, the best of the produce. As the pasuk says, v'zel lecha trumas matonom, kol chaylev yitzhar, the choicest of the oil, v'chol chaylev tirosh, and the choicest of the wine, the dogon and of the grain, reishisom asher yidnu Hashem lechol nasatim. You give the best. Uv'manas aniyim, bachra ha'torah ba'atz meloses la'ani v'lager ha'garua. When it comes to manas aniyim, you're giving the worst. What is that? Es ha'oilelos. We're talking now about the crop, the grain, the vine. Oilelos are the sort of the defective clusters of grapes. When you have a good cluster of a grape, you've seen it. It looks like a cone, an inverted, like a cone, an upside down cone with a wide shoulder, and it comes down to a point. That's a good, strong, healthy cluster of grapes. The oilelos are defective clusters. Anovim she'ein lohem lo kesef, they haven't got these broad shoulders. V'lo netef, and they haven't got this drop, this sort of pendant, this cone-shaped lower part. V'chein laniach peh b'soif hasodeh, the corner of the fields. The corner of the fields are the bit in which people take shortcuts and they walk over it. B'mokum drisas raglei odam behema, animals, people walk through the corners of the field. Shebevadei mekalkalim heim sham es hatvur. So you've got to give the aniyim, the poor people, the worst of the crop, and when it comes to the kohanim, you give them the best. Why is that? Uma bein matnas kuhuna lematnas aniyim, asks the Oznaim LaTorah. Venira, next paragraph. Sheyard the Torah l'seif daita shel adam. The Torah is going down to the very depths of human psyche. Shekasha alav lahafrish chelek mehaynai v'loses lacherim. Giving tzedakah, giving away your own produce, your own money, is very difficult. And when you do give away trumas and maestros to the kohanim and the levim, a person is thinking subconsciously, perhaps, two things. Aleph, number one, he thinks to himself, when I give matnas kuhuna, after all, the kohanim and the levim didn't get a share in the land, and therefore it's fair enough that I have to give some of my own land and produce to them. Base, whatever I'm working on behalf of the kohanim and levim, they're also doing their part. The kohanim and the levim either are officiating in the Beis Hamikdash or sifsei kohen. They're teaching the Torah to the Jewish people. They're also doing, their part, their community service, as it were. And since their work is holy work, I've got to give him the best, and I feel very comfortable to do so. Avo, next paragraph. This poor person, the landowner, the wealthy man, may sadly think to himself, well, this poor person, he got a portion in the land. Why is he poor? Why does he need to collect? Maybe he's just lazy. That he's destitute. He's not looking for work. He wants an easy way out to go around and collecting. Why should I have to work for him? This is what the Balabayas perhaps is thinking. But it's not true, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows man's thoughts. Sometimes they're wrong. On the contrary, poverty is not due to a person's laziness, in the same way that wealth is not due to a person's industry and hard work. Of course, there's hishtadlus, but ultimately, a person's financial situation is decreed from on high. There has to be wealthy and poor people in the world. Even if everyone was very hardworking and industrious, no one's. You're not going to obliterate poverty. For some reason, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants there to be poor people. As parnas hasaniyim la'ashirim, whatever, for whatever reason, like the Gemara in Baba Basra says, Tunas Rufus asked Rabbi Kiva why they're poor people. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves the poor, why does He make them poor? So it's to give zechus to the richer people, that they need that zechus, whatever it is. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has His hidden ways. For kedei lahokel, last paragraph concludes the Oznaim LaTorah. For kedei lahokel al balabayis lahafresh chelik mitzvah sadeu, to make it easier for the balabayis to give to the poor person, for loses osolaniyim, bo hatzivu loses lohem es hagorua. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was well aware that a person may be thinking, this poor person, he just doesn't work hard enough. Why should I give him? And therefore, to make it easier for the balabayis to give him, he instructs him to give of the worst of his produce. As ha'oinelus, the defective clusters, or peas hasodeh, the corners of the field. Or balabayis yiten aliba v'yom, and the balabayis will think to himself, Hari mutzlachani, I'm a successful fellow. V'ani hoisa peas, v'im hoisa peas hasodeh shayeches li, and if I would really own the corners of my field, lo hayu darsim oso kolkach, people wouldn't walk over my field. And if these defective clusters of grapes would really be mine, there'd be strong clusters with broad shoulders and sort of lowered parts, cone-shaped lower parts. It must be that they don't even belong to me, they belong to the poor person, for who lo yutzlach, he's not a successful person, and that's why they're not of top quality. And a person will think to himself, I'm a strong person, I can grab the shibolim, and how come some fell? Why did I go past and I forgot this and that? I'm very industrious, I'm very good at my work. I don't forget things. It must be that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted it this way. And therefore, it will make it easier for the person to give to the poor person. So a very, very interesting insight of the Oznaim LaTorah from Zalman Sorotskin. Why is there a difference between Matnas Kahuna and Matnas Aniyim? Matnas Kahuna, a person is more willing to give to the Kohen, to the Levi. He knows, after all, they didn't get a chelik in the land. They're also doing, holy work, so you feel more comfortable to give, and therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you can give from the chela, from the choicest of the crop. Masha'en, when it comes to the oni, HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows that a person is going to struggle with that, and for wrong reasons. But yet HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes it easier for the balabayis, and he thinks to himself, give him from the gorua, and that will make the actual giving easier. So at the end of the day, the oni will have. Very interesting insight of the Oznaim LaTorah. Okay, let's move on to something else. The next is a few psukim later. This is paragraph number 2. Do not hate your brother in your heart. You have to surely rebuke your fellow man. Do not raise the sin against him. So that is the famous mitzvah of teichacha, of rebuking another person. It's one of the hardest mitzvahs in the whole Torah, to get it right. To rebuke a person constructively, effectively, halachically, it's very tricky. Now there's a lovely piece of the Emes Liakov, of the Yaakov Kamenetsky, which I'd like to work through. Let's try and work through it quickly. Very interesting insight of Rabbi Yaakov. Hine. Again, this is on the bottom box, the bottom of page 1. Hine. Regilim anu lachshav. We are accustomed to think she mitzvahs teichacha hi she'anu tzrichim lias hashomrim shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We think generally, when it comes to the mitzvah of teichacha, of rebuking our fellow man, that we have to be God's policeman. Shomrim shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Since Hashem ultimately wants people to keep mitzvahs, HaKadosh Baruch Hu appointed us as His policemen, that we can supervise over our fellows, that they also do the mitzvahs of Hashem. And therefore, people think that the mitzvah of teichacha, of rebuking your fellow man, is a mitzvah which is bein adam l'makom. If that were indeed the intention of the Torah, you can ask, if that's the case, if indeed it is a mitzvah bein adam l'makom, then why doesn't it apply even if you have to embarrass the person? Yes, maybe there is a law you shouldn't embarrass anybody. We know there's a classic rule in Torah. Asay, dochelos asay. And asay pushes aside the los asay. So the asay of teichacha should push aside not to embarrass somebody. So how come, if teichacha is indeed a mitzvah, bein adam l'makom, the mitzvah asay of teichacha should push aside any los asay, and therefore, if it means I'm embarrassing a person by telling him to do X, Y, or Z, I should be entitled to do it. But that's not the halacha. So therefore, gam before that, gam tomua, and it's also perplexing, says Rabbi Yaakov, Ma'dis, I'm at the bottom paragraph, Ma'dis and Meseches Erchim, the Gemara says in Erchim, which is the source of all the halachas of Teichacha, Daf Tesayin on base, She mitzvahs Teichacha eina ela ad sheyaka osai, or ad sheyikalel osai. How far does Teichacha go? Until, says the Gemara, that the person on the receiving end of your Teichacha either hits you or curses you. That's what the Gemara says. That's quite extreme. V'amai. But why should that be the limit? We don't find this with other mitzvahs. L'moshel. Yeah, let's think of another mitzvah. Let's say you're at Heathrow Airport and you've got to put on tefillin. And you're putting on tefillin quietly in the corner, and somebody comes over to you and says, "What are you doing? How can you put on tefillin?" The halacha is, you've got to put on tefillin. So what? Someone is shouting at you or embarrassing you. You've got a chiyuv to put on tefillin. If you're looking at it in a sort of purely technical way, why should the mitzvah of teichacha be any different to any other mitzvah? Therefore, concludes Rabbi Yaakov, Elo, top of the next page, Shekan gil salonu ha-Torah, tzurasa shal mitzvah teichacha mahi. The Torah therefore tells us that the mitzvah of teichacha is very specific. If you explore it carefully, you'll see that the mitzvah of teichacha is actually a mitzvah bein odom lechaveiro, not bein odom l'makom. Sinas v'avas reya, hating and loving other people, nakima v'natira, taking revenge, not bearing a grudge. These are all mitzvahs bein odom lechaveiro. V'hainu she'egdira lonu ha-Torah she'yesod mitzvahs teichacha tzrich sha'achreita margish ki'ilu ha'mechiach eisa le'toiva gedola. The way, the parameters of the mitzvah are that the person who you are rebuking should feel that you are doing him the greatest favor in the world. That is effective teichacha. That he's returning a lost item. Imagine you lose your purse, you lose your phone, and someone returns it to you. How grateful do you feel? Well, so too, if someone rebukes you properly, you should feel the same sensation. V'nam shelezeh moshel, he says Rabbi Yaakov. Echad sheba lilvos mechaverei, kesef. Whether you see someone comes to borrow money from someone. V'chshenichnas lebeis hamalveh, motze sham gvir echad. And I want to borrow money, so I go to a wealthy man's house, I knock on his door, and I go in there, there are other people waiting, and then there's another man there, and there's another person who is not honest, or he's lost a lot of money and he hasn't got what to pay back. If I'm going to somebody's house and I can see the malva, the lender, is lending a vast amount of money to somebody who I know is not going to be able to pay him back, so if I go to the malva and say, look, you're lending him on false pretexts, he's told you that he's going to be able to come into some money soon, you know that it's not true. The malva is not going to turn around to you and say, hey, who are you? Why are you telling me what to do? He's just very grateful that you've told him the truth and he won't lose his money. Well, so too. The lashon of teichacha is sort of an exploration, i.e., he quotes the Yiddish word, opwesen. You're helping him. But if you're embarrassing him in the process, so the person who's doing something wrong, who's being rebuked, feels that this guy just has it in for me. And therefore the teichacha is ineffective, and you have not fulfilled the mitzvah of teichacha. Aseh doche lo saseh is only when you're doing the aseh. But if you're doing the aseh by embarrassing the person, that's not the mitzvah of teichacha. He doesn't feel the love. And therefore, by the way, he says in Ha'ara 17, the editor writes, I think it's Daniel Neustadt, he's the grandson of Rabbi Yaakov, I think he edited the Sefer. He adds, B'divrei Rabbeinu le'el Parshas Vayetze. Take a look in Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, Nemes Yaakov and Parshas Vayetze. Shebir lefizeh madua om Yaakov la'anshei Choron. Remember, Yaakov Avinu goes to the well and he addresses them as Achai me'ayin atem. Tekiven do'hayoreitz eleichichem. He wanted to rebuke them. Why are you leaving your work early? It's not yet sunset. Hutzruch laharis lahem shu oyavom. That's why he addresses them in a term of endearment of Achai. So, says Rabbi Yaakov something fascinating. The mitzvah of teichacha, we think, is that we're God's policemen. It's a mitzvah in Odom L'Makom, nothing doing. Says Rabbi Yaakov, because if that was the case, then you should say you should embarrass the person. Why is there a limit of Atsheyake or Atsheyakala? You should even do it. If someone tells you, he hits you if you put on tefillin, you've got to still put on tefillin. The point is, that's not teichacha. Teichacha is a mitzvah ben adam l'chaveiro. And if you're embarrassing the person, you're not fulfilling the mitzvah of teichacha. Because the person's got to feel the love. It's got to be that he sees and feels that you care about him. Not that you're just God's policeman. And therefore, if you're short of that, then it's not considered teichacha, you're not doing the mitzvah. And therefore, it's not appropriate to say, aseh docha lo saseh. That's the important, and just sort of proper to that. There's a pasuk in Mishlei. How do you give teichacha? Says Rabbi Yaakov, he's got to feel the love. You've got to do it in a clever way. Teichacha is a very hard mitzvah to get it right. There's a pasuk in Mishlei, al techeach leitz pen yisnoecha. Don't rebuke a leitz, sort of a scoffer, because he might hate you. Hechiach lechacham v'yavecha. But rebuke a wise man and he will love you. Now the Parsha understanding of that pasuk in Mishlei is that don't rebuke a leitz because it's not going to work. He'll hate you. And rather rebuke a wise man, he'll love you. Yeah, because a wise man will appreciate teichacha as opposed to a leitz. I think it's the Alshich who says a different pshat. You know what it means? Al techiach leitz, don't rebuke the leitz, i.e. we're talking about the same person. Don't talk down to the person and talk to this fellow as if he's a leitz. Talk to the chacham shabai. You're such a good man, you're a wise person. If you would phrase it in that positive way, as if the person is a chacham rather than a leitz, it will be more effective. The classic story they all tell is Abraham Tversky, Zichron Livracha. One time he tells the story of, as a child, he was I think 8 or 9 years old, and it was Rosh Hashanah, and they have Meshulachim who had passed through, and there was one Rav who was staying there for Rosh Hashanah, and Rabbi Abraham Tversky as a child loved chess, and on Rosh Hashanah afternoon the Rav who was staying there, or whoever it was, challenged the young Abe Tversky to a game of chess, and he played. And his father got to hear about it. He played chess on Rosh Hashanah. And of course, halachically, it's allowed, but Tversky's father felt that this is not Rosh Hashanah. So how did he rebuke him? He called him in, and he was learning Rosh Hashanah afternoon, and the young Abraham Tversky was standing there. He just said to him, "You play chess on Rosh Hashanah? And you didn't leave your father's study until you were dismissed in those days." And he said yes, waited there, and he understood that his father was displeased that that's not how you play, that's not how you spend Rosh Hashanah. And then he said to him, he goes, "Did you beat him?" And little Abraham Tversky said, "Twice." He said, "Well done." And then he got the message. But he got the message in a positive way. That's pshat. If you talk in the chacham shabbai, in other words, you're bigger than that, you're better than that. That's how to give teichacha. So says Rabbi Yaakov, it's a din ben adam lechavera, and if he's not feeling the love, then it's not teichacha. So very important yesod in the mitzvah of teichacha, a difficult mitzvah. So 2 ideas, I think that's all we have time for. Number 1 is the oznaim laTorah. How come there's this difference between matnas kuna, matnas aniyim? Matnas kuna you give from the choices of your crop, but matnas aniyim it's the inferior, the defective part of the crop. And the answer is because we're talking to the human psyche, and therefore matnas kuna a person would much be more comfortable to give away. Masha'in came matnas aniyim, that sometimes a person will struggle with that. So we're talking to that person in that way, and therefore we sort of a dispensation will talk to him, and therefore he'll actually be more agreeable to give away, and it'll be easier for him. Very interesting insight. And then the idea of Yaakov of how to give rebuke to what is the mitzvah of teichacha. It's a mitzvah ben adam l'chaveri rather than a mitzvah ben adam l'makam. Okay, we'll leave it there.